forever, ever hold it, never mind. Oh,
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Miles Away with Mike and Leah. Today we're in Silt, Colorado. It's not a very big town here, and about 13 miles from here are where those firefighters were killed in that terrible blaze a few years ago. Behind me is the Colorado River, and man, it is just beautiful. It got down to about 26 last night, so that wasn't too bad, and today is supposed to warm up to the 40s. So we're going to be exploring this area, and we're going to show you some videos of the mountain ranges around here, the Colorado River, and when we go into town. Stay tuned. After driving over 3.5 hours through the Rocky Mountains, we arrived at the Silt, Colorado KOA. I got to tell you, this KOA site is just beautiful. Silt's on the west side of the Rocky Mountains and about 30 miles west of Glenwood Springs. The elevation here in Silt is over a mile high, and even with the temperature in the 40s, the snow barely melts. We even cracked the kitchen windows in the morning while sipping coffee so we could listen to the roar of the Colorado River. The sunsets and moonrises here in Silt, Colorado are just beautiful. And we even had large deer walking around the campground at dusk every evening. The city of Glenwood Springs, which is 30 miles east of Silt, sits in a deep valley surrounded by very high mountains. The town is a ski destination for avid skiers, and it's also an old mining and western town. There is a very interesting mixture of old and new buildings here. Frontier lawman Watt Earp's best friend, Doc Holliday, also spent his last days here. High above the town of Glenwood Springs is the old city cemetery dating back to the 1880s. Many of the grave markers were made of wood, and they're no longer there, and the names of many of these people have long been forgotten, except for the stones which mark some of the graves. There's also some really interesting frontier legends buried here. Kid Curry, who rode with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and the Hole-in-the-Wall gang, is buried here. Doc Holliday, friend of Watt Earp, who was a famous frontier lawman, is also buried somewhere in the old city cemetery. There's a nice monument and plaque dedicated to Doc Holliday. Watt Earp had this to say about his friend Doc Holliday. Doc was a dentist whom necessity made a gambler, a gentleman whom disease made a frontier vagabond, a philosopher whom life made a caustic wit, a long, lean, ash-blond fellow nearly dead with consumption, and at the same time the most skillful gambler and the nerviest, speediest, deadliest man with a 6-gun I ever knew. There's also a small museum here in Glenwood Springs with some really interesting items, like a real wagon, a real buggy, and a real cast iron stove. Can't imagine how difficult it would have been to cook on that thing. An ice box, and a front pedal powered sewing machine. Stay tuned for our next adventure on our channel, Miles Away with Mike and Leah.
everything means forever, ever hold it, never mind. Oh,